to this month's episode of Associations Now Presents, an original podcast series from the American Society of Association Executives. I'm Gary LaBranche, Chief Executive Officer of RIMS, the Risk and Insurance Management Society. I am delighted to be joined on this podcast with Francisco Gómez, founder and CEO of Factum Global, a boutique consulting firm specializing in international expansion, market analysis, and strategic growth. Also joining us is Pietro Macchiarella, Senior Director, Data and Insights at YPO, the world's largest community of chief executives that come together to become better leaders and better people. So I've said a little bit about each of you, but if you could tell us a little bit more, starting with you, Francisco.
Yes, thank you, Gary. Pleasure to be here with you and Pietro. As you said, I founded Factum Global, a firm that specializes in helping both for-profit companies as well as associations and nonprofits expanding internationally. We focus on truly helping organizations understand where to go, how to do it, and how to sustain that growth in the international market. I'm doing this for the last 20 years or so, and delighted to be here.
Excellent. Pietro?
Thank you, Gary and Francisco. Good to be here with both of you. As you said, Gary, I work for YPO, which is the largest organization of CEOs. We have 37,000 members in 140 countries, so as international as it gets. And myself, I'm very international, having grown up in Europe, lived in 3 different countries in Europe, and then moved to the US about 20 years ago. I'm also the chair of the ASAE International Association Advisory Council, which right now is a great place to be because we are kind of the center of the storm in a way, supporting associations in their international experience or trying to internationalize.
Fantastic. Well, both of you obviously have a tremendous non-North American experience. And I'm just curious, currently the world is experiencing what we in the risk management community call geopolitical disruption, which is a fancy way of saying chaos is abounding in our current world today. And associations and corporations and consumers and people in business have to try to navigate all of that. It's uncharted territory, to say the least. So, Pietro, your group is international as it gets. What does geopolitical disruption mean? How are you seeing it impact YPO?
Well, so first of all, disclaimer from the lawyers. These are my personal opinions and not the ones of my employer. I will say that some of the assumptions that we are taking for granted, up until now, are gone. If you look at globalization, it's been sort of a constant since at least the 1990s. I think there is an index. I think it's the World Bank has an index that shows the trade openness, where you look basically at the imports and exports globally and you divide it by the GDP, the global GDP. And the index has been growing like crazy. In fact, I think it's being faster than twice as fast as a global GDP growth in the past 20 years. And so we went from, trade being about 30% of global GDP to being 60% or more. And then suddenly this has come to a halt. Everything is being questioned again, and so obviously this has an impact on any membership organization. In fact, I feel like we are actually more impacted than our members. So if you think about the geopolitical uncertainty, that's the members themselves, for their companies, if you're a trade organization or in our case a business organization. It affects the way you operate the association, and also affects how the members interact with each other. So it's kind of a triple hit, and obviously that impacts everything that you do. At the same time, I am kind of the eternal optimist, and one thing that I do say is that problems are often opportunities, and if very often we are nice to have for members, all of us in the association space. But when there is a crisis, we become actually a must-have if we are relevant and if we are relevant to what they need at the moment. So I do think that right now what I see is actually a bigger relevance for organizations like ours because we're helping members when they need us.
That's interesting. So if you are truly valuable and relevant, you'll be more valuable and relevant in times of polycrisis or chaos, or when the world is not going according to what we had thought it would. Francisco, respond to that. I mean, are you seeing that in your practice?
Yes, of course. I do think that the main thing, however, is that for associations, geopolitical disruption is truly no longer something that is happening out there. I think we used to see that as a side thing where, we're going to keep these in scenario planning and we're going to think about the what ifs, but it was not as real. And it's now showing up in very practical ways. When you think about travel decisions, event planning, member expectations, partner relationships, sanctions, data, privacy concerns, reputation, right? So it's all over the place. And what it makes it especially difficult is that associations have traditionally tried to stay away from politics. But today, I think this is much harder because there is risk not only in taking action, but also in not taking action. People increasingly expect the organization support to stand for something. And that creates tension because associations want to focus on policy and not politics. But in a lot of cases, the two are now intertwined. So the real challenge is not just whether to speak, but how do we speak in a way that is consistent with mission and values? In the past, many associations tried to stay away and above politics, but today silence can be read as a statement too.
Right.
So that's something that I think most associations are wrestling with right now.
So you touched on two, I think, very important pieces there. One is that external issues really are internal, even down to when and how we travel. That's a pretty internal issue. And then, secondly, the whole idea that by not engaging, you are saying something. By not speaking up, by not engaging with the chaotic world as it is, that can be read, can be viewed as negatively as if you said something. So, and I think that's especially true the more that the association presents to the world, the more engaged with the world. So I was thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking, for RIMS, one of the ways that we primarily relate to the world is through our certification program, which is growing more rapidly outside of North America than inside North America, but also through our convention, which we call Risk World. We bring about 11,000 people together every year, and Risk World isn't just an educational conference; it's a commercial marketplace. It is the world's largest commercial insurance B2B marketplace, and people from all over the world come there to place their insurance, to buy insurance, commercial insurance. So it's actually a very critical part of the whole value proposition to the commercial insurance world. But this year, last year, a little bit less so. But this year, we're seeing a definite impact on some people not being able to get visas, or not being able to get visas in time to come to the convention in Chicago, in Philadelphia. Also, one of our students, we have student groups. We have with our partner Spencer Educational Foundation, we provide a platform for international student competition in risk management, and one of the universities from Africa are not able to get a visa so far. So we're trying to work through those issues. But this constant chaos that we're seeing, the changes of rules, regulations, consumer preference, and in the case of Canada, we're also seeing a significant pullback from our Canadian friends who just don't want to deal with the American economy right now, sort of a soft boycott. How are you communicating those kinds of risks to your stakeholders, to your leaders and board members and others that are important to your organizations?
There is a difference between maybe concern and panic. And I think panic happens when there's no plan. And my opinion, that's when leadership has to step in, particularly when talking to the board. It's really about transparency and having a plan. So do some scenario planning, look at what we know, what we don't know, and what potentially the consequences of some things will be. These are, I think this is the way you moderate some of the risks. Otherwise, again, panic kicks in, and that's never a good thing because usually decisions made under panic are not ideal.
That's interesting. Francisco? Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Pietro is saying. I think the key is to communicate in a way that is candid but not alarming. The boards and the stakeholders in general do not need drama. They need context. They need scenario thinking. You were talking about that, Pietro, and clarity about what the organization is watching. I usually think in terms of sort of three questions: what is the risk? What is the potential impact? And what are we doing about it? I mean, that is the conversation you want to have with the board. And within that question of what is the risk, for those watching that may know me, I talk extensively about the risk of inaction, right? And it's related to what we spoke about earlier. Is acting has a risk, but not acting has also a risk. And in many cases, that risk could be greater for certain organizations. So, that helps turn uncertainty into management. And it also helps people understand that risk is not always a reason to stop. In 2025, I saw a lot of organizations stopping. Sometimes, they were just thinking that things are going to get back to normal, or let's see what happens. And in 2026, I see the same organizations realizing this chaos that, Gary, you were talking about earlier is just the world we live in, and we need to learn to live with that and figure out how to proceed more carefully, right? So I think the goal is not to eliminate uncertainty, but the goal is to make it manageable. Those of us that have been dealing in international business for years and have been working in countries that are, less sort of sophisticated in terms of rules and regulations and those types of things, we're used to that kind of chaos. So we need to bring that thinking to everything that is happening now and understand this is really not new. It's new in this context, but it's nothing that we haven't faced before. And I like the fact that I'm seeing that mentality shift in executives in the association world, and I see them taking action, which I think is very important.
As you were speaking, I was reminded of a quote by Peter Drucker, one of the greatest writers on management theory and management practice. Peter Drucker, he said, the danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence. It's thinking and acting with yesterday's logic in mind, right? So we have to retrain, relearn our approaches because we can't solve the problems of tomorrow the same way we helped create those problems yesterday. So that, turbulence is not the problem. The problem is the way we think about turbulence or don't think about turbulence. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I love what you both said. I was gonna add that I think there's one thing that is non-negotiable, which is the mission. So that's what we do. That should not change no matter what crisis is or whatever the context is. How we do it, that changes, and that's the flexibility that I think becomes much more important under the current circumstances, and I think that's what sort of where I see that the majority of the impact is really in how we do things. And for example, you were talking about having an annual event where it becomes much more difficult to get attendees, for example, from different parts of the world. So maybe the next step is to regionalize some of these events, and I've seen some organizations. Associations actually do that. So maybe duplicate that, do one big event in the US, one in Europe, and suddenly you're not dependent on one big event anymore, but you have now the option for members to attend either one. And so again, that how we do it is where you can actually have the biggest impact.
You're talking and I'm listening and processing what you're saying. I'm curious, have you ever done a desktop exercise with your stakeholders, your board members, your management team? Desktop exercises for our listeners are scenarios that you make up in advance. You craft a scenario in advance. I just used ChatGPT yesterday to create one on geopolitical shock plus supply chain and market disruption. It spit back out to me a scenario overview with some key stress points and then some exercise objectives. And then it takes you through a 60 to 90 minute process, including things that you drop into the exercise as shockers or stressors to the systems, things like that, different timed injections where key decisions have to be made. Have you ever worked with any of those type processes?
Yes, we do it all the time. I mean, as a consultant helping organizations expand internationally, you can imagine scenario planning is a huge part of it. And it keeps evolving though. And in an environment like this, the thinking also needs to evolve. It used to be that we would sit down with boards and try to come up with a 5-year strategy. And, it would be a beautiful, shiny piece of paper that boards and executives would use to communicate, this is what we're going to do in the next 5 years. And that is no longer as useful as it used to be. Yes, you have to have a north, you have to have a vision, understand where you want to be in the next several years, but the pathways to get there are very different. And you need to understand sort of in advance what happens if, right? So what happens if we go into our preferred pathway and A, B, or C happens, then where are we going next? Are we going to the B pathway? Are we going to run some pilots in parallel? How do we start testing some of these avenues to make sure that our strategy is resilient to those changes? So it's not about, and we said this earlier, it's not about avoiding the chaos or avoiding the changes that are happening around us, but it's how do we build an organization that is adaptable and nimble so that when things start to show up, we're monitoring, we can see where things are sort of starting to look like they're going to come our way. And we have a plan to navigate those things because we have discussed those possibilities. It's impossible to predict everything that may happen, but I think you can predict certain things. And, what happens if there's a war? What happens if there's another pandemic? What happens if, all of a sudden our number one source of revenue goes away, right? We have several associations in 2025 that lost substantial revenue when the USAID agency will disappear. They depended on contracts from that organization, and they found themselves in a situation that they were not anticipating. So what happens? They could have anticipated that, right? We have X percentage of revenue attached to a single source. What happens if that source goes away? So we could anticipate USAID was going to be disappearing, but we could have anticipated that something could have happened that would jeopardize that source of revenue. And we should have been preparing to navigate and try to diversify and get away from that dependency.
Right. Pietro?
Yeah, likewise. I mean, I work for an organization that objectively is extremely healthy. We have 95% renewal rate, 96%. We grow very healthily, and everything is great. But the good thing is also I work for for business leaders, so they are used to kind of being paranoid a little bit, and what could happen potentially that will disrupt our model. So this is basically my daily life, but it's very interesting how we're gonna see also from like how the external environment potentially can impact competition. So what competition potentially can come out of nowhere that we are not expecting. So this is an exercise, for example, that we're doing right now, where we're looking at how again the external environment potentially creates new competitors. So that's something that is very, very interesting. And in fact, I advise anybody who's listening to think about that. Even if things are going great, just think about potentially what are your core competitive advantages and which ones are also the ones that can be disrupted more easily by existing or new incoming competitors, and just see how you can protect them or how you can evolve to protect them.
I work for a bunch of risk managers, professional risk managers. So risk awareness is, front and center in all things at all times. Although, I always, when people say, oh, it must be terrible working for people who are just always worried about risk. Well, it's much more nuanced and strategic than just worrying about bad things that can happen. It really is thinking through the different scenarios and looking for the opportunities and meshing that into our overall strategy. We have a formalized enterprise risk management process where we're constantly and certainly annually a deep dive, but continuous continuously evaluating our potential risks and how we might mitigate those or transfer those risks or reduce their potential impact to us. So it's been fascinating working with them. And I've always been amazed at how willing they are to take well thought through strategic risks. Because anybody in the, risk management will tell you, but part of the reason that companies and hospital systems and university systems engage in risk management is to grow. And so getting back to this opportunity, for where can we find the growth opportunity in these times of chaos, I think is important. Before I forget, I did want to throw in a couple of things for our listeners. There's a lot written out there about risk trends in risk and that sort of thing. I just want to point out a couple. Every January, the World Economic Forum publishes an annual global risk report or risk survey. And this year it was issued on January 14th of 2026, about 6 weeks before the current war in Iran began. And interestingly, the number one expected issue was geopolitical confrontation, which was seen more as an economic issue, tie it back more into the tariffs and that sort of thing. But the number 5 of the 10 expected risks for 2026 was, in fact, state-based armed conflict. State-based armed conflict, or war, as we think of it today, which is, I think, very, very interesting. Number 6 was cyber, a close one to 5. Very interesting that in January, and this is a survey of hundreds and hundreds of risk and business professionals, that geopolitical risk, geopolitical conflict was very, very high on the list. They also asked, what are the longer-term risks 10 years out? And almost all of them or the bulk of them were environmental related, major weather risks, that sort of thing. And only one or two were social issues, inequality and that sort of thing. And a few more were technological, but none were geopolitical or armed conflict, which I found to be very interesting. Short term, a lot more potential conflict, longer term, more climate change kinds of issues. So there's a number of these indexes. Aon, the insurance broker, publishes one. BlackRock publishes a geopolitical index and that sort of thing. So, mark on your calendar at the end of the fourth quarter every year. Just start doing some searches and get an AI agent out there looking for some of these and maybe provide you with a summary report of what the consensus views are there out there. Where do you guys go for your information? How do you, what sources do you go to manage your way of thinking, to guide your analysis?
Gary, I have one of the things that we advise our clients is to stay on top of technology. And I have to try to live the same principles that I preach. So I've built some agents with AI to help me stay on top of relevant news, giving them strict guidelines as to which kinds of sources. You mentioned a couple: World Economic Forum, United Nations, certain news outlets that I trust. And it sort of feeds me the information on what's happening. And then I can go and follow up and try to see what else is out there. So today it's very easy to stay on top of this. It used to be sort of this thing of trying to look for things, but now you have a way to just sort of very easily build agents or information that is going to be coming to you at the right appropriate time. So I highly recommend doing that. I also wanted to mention very quickly, since you were talking about some of these resources, I am part of the ASAE Executive Management Advisory Council, and they recently put out, and I'm talking about in the last 2 weeks, my colleagues developed a discussion guide on navigating politicized issues. I highly recommend it. I think it's a 11 or 12-page document that is helping associations think through this. You can find it on my own LinkedIn. I shared it on ASAE Collaborate, or simply reach out to ASAE. I'm sure they'll guide you to the right place to get the guide. But I think it's association leaders helping other association leaders think about some of the issues that we're discussing right now.
Yeah, very cool. Francisco, I can add something like that as well, because we, as the International Associations Advisory Council, we actually provide a lot of content to members as well. So we have almost pretty much a monthly webinar on hot topics. So if anybody is interested in anything international and associations, please keep an eye on our webinars, because there is a lot of content. In fact, we just did one on when to speak up, for example, when there is.
Interesting.
So it was extremely hot topic. But going back to your original question, Gary, one thing I love what Francisco said about basically having AI gather some news sources for you. One thing I also like to do is to look at different perspectives on news. So one of my daily routine is actually when I wake up, I look at European newspapers. When I'm still in bed, I read different, like, luckily I speak different languages, so I can see how they sort of tackle some of the issues. And then in the evening, I usually read Wall Street Journal or some American media, just to see the different perception of and the relative importance of different issues that maybe for us are not as important. So I also recommend, if you can, look at the international perspective a little bit, see how other countries are reacting to different pieces of news.
Get out of your own bubble. Get out of your own bubble. Get out of your own echo chamber, and look for those diverse sources and resources that you might not stumble over in the normal course of events.
100%.
Interesting. Francisco, do you have something to add?
That's critical, because it's harder and harder to just get the news these days. They come with opinions. So
Yeah.
we have to make sure that we look at different sources to try to get our own idea of what's actually happening.
Right. Thinking about that for a second, thinking about the longer term as we start to bring this podcast to a conclusion, think about a different time horizon of, say, 24 months or thereabouts. Where's your head at? Where would you suggest other association professionals ought to start thinking about the next series of trends, or the continuation or cascade effect of these trends? What do you see in the future that we should be thinking about today?
I mean, there are a few, right? Pietro, I don't know which ones are on your list, but yeah, I can think of
It'll be a long list.
Yes.
Yeah, obviously, one is the direction of U.S. policy and trade. I mean, whether we like it or not, that is impacting the world. This sort of continued geopolitical instability is something that we have to think about. You were mentioning, Gary, travel and visa friction. I think those issues are going to continue to be increasing with everything that is happening. But I do want to say that, a lot of economists out there for years were talking about deglobalization and, everybody just sort of going inward and staying away from the world. And I have disagreed from the very beginning. I don't think that's happening. I don't think that will happen. What we're seeing is a reconfiguration of how we do global business, and we see new alliances and partnerships and trade routes that are emerging. And so this global trade will always be there, but we have to take a look at those frictions that we're looking at. Aside from that, I think obviously cyber and data risks are huge, and how AI is changing member expectations and operating models. And this is something that should be at the forefront of any association thinking. Is not whether we like it or not, is when will your operating model be truly impacted by all of this, and how do you anticipate it and take advantage of those things? And more broadly, I think, leaders should prepare for a more fragmented world. Fortunately, like I said, we're going to see some of these alliances happening. That's going to create a lot of opportunity, but it's not going to be sort of as easy to navigate as it once was. It's not about being pessimistic. It means being ready, right? The organizations that do well will be the ones, I think, that can adapt quickly without losing sight of who they are. Pietro was talking about mission. I think that's critical. So, I think the future will reward associations that are globally aware, strategically selective, and operationally resilient, which I think is very important. Is how do we go from strategy to execution, and how do we do that properly?
Yes, right. Francisco, I think you said it so well. I don't know if I can add anything more so eloquently, but I will say that I also see, I think, the sort of polarization of the world, the creation of different regional interest areas. And I think that's part of the thing that will impact how you do business around the world. I also think that there is probably some economic pressures that will happen depending on how the different world economies go. And people know I tend to be still optimistic about the US economy, not so much about maybe Europe. I think that the interesting thing about Asia is probably being affected, at least short term, by oil right now, and so I don't know what will be the long-term impact of that. And of course, I think you kind of mentioned, Francisco, technology. I think AI is also a sort of, I mean, it's an opportunity, it's a great opportunity, but it's also a concern. I was on a call yesterday where Sam Altman was one of the speakers, and I could see actually in the executives, of AI executives, even some concerns from themselves, meaning like this can be a great thing for mankind, but it can also be potentially a threat if we don't manage it well. And so that obviously has an impact also on associations and how we manage it for our members and in the interaction with members. Yeah, I think these are my main points.
Thank you. You both sort of touched on something that's been on my mind and on my radar, and that goes back to the Trump administration's national security strategy white paper, which really explicitly said, we're no longer going to be U.S. in charge of everything, right? We're going to be in charge of our stuff, and you all be in charge of your stuff. And so bringing to an end the era of a U.S.-dominated world order. And going back to, I think both of you touched on the idea of multipolarity. In other words, there'll be different regions of influence around the world, and that is going to re-engineer the way supply chains work, the way sourcing works, the way workflow proceeds, where migration patterns happen, all of those things, and also where knowledge flows. So that will be, I think, very, very interesting for those of us in the association space. So that multipolarity concept, to see where that takes us long term. We've spoken about AI, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's not, in my view, it's not a question of will AI impact, us, but to what degree will AI reshape the world of work and reshape the kind of the relationships that we have as individuals, and the synergy or collaboration or lack thereof or loss thereof between organizations. I think AI now it's about the impacts of AI on all of that. And then, I think, lastly, the idea of we as individual leaders, how are we adapting and changing to the challenges that are in front of us? Because going back to Drucker, the problem with turbulence is not turbulence; it's the way we think about turbulence, and the idea that we have to change our mindset in order to keep up with this new deck of cards that we're being presented through, whether it's geopolitical chaos or the new world that we're looking at. And I think it's going to be especially true if GDP grows at 2% versus 3%. If U.S. GDP grows at 3%, we have an entirely different, very optimistic forecast in front of us. If we grow at 2% or under, things get a lot tougher, a lot quicker for a lot of people. So that's it for us. We got to wrap this up. So let me just say thanks to everyone for listening to this episode of Association Now Presents. Join us each month as we explore key topics relevant to association professionals, discuss the challenges and opportunities in the field today, and highlight the significant impact associations have on the economy, the U.S., and the world. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And for more information on topics impacting the association space, visit Associations Now online at associationsnow.com. Thank you all very much for listening, and thank you to my panelists, Pietro and Francesco. Many thanks for your help in trying to decipher and discover where we're going in the future. Appreciate it. Thank you all. Have a good day.